Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Did the affair with the boss displace the husband? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. She was stunningly beautiful. I could even say that I would go to great lengths for her. She was 5 feet 5 inches, 120 pounds, brown eyes, and fiery red hair. When she was near, I couldn't take my eyes off her. She knew her allure and was aware that every man in the building was captivated by her. Her name was Constance Frederick, and she worked as a secretary where I did. Under different and more favorable circumstances, I might have pursued her immediately, but I couldn't. Despite my strong feelings, I had to behave. This lady was married, and I couldn't bring myself to get involved with someone else's partner. It wasn't a question of morality or ethics, it was simply that I could never do to another man what was done to me. It hurt, and 3 years later, it still hurt. This might not make much sense. On one hand, I say I would go to great lengths for her, and on the other, I claim I would never get involved with someone else's partner. I don't need to make sense. I am human and flawed like everyone else. It was Wednesday evening, and according to a tradition that started long before I began working at Cambridge Enterprises, everyone stopped at Antonio's lounge after work for a drink or two. It was always on Wednesday, and although I asked a few times, no one could explain why it was Wednesday and not Friday. Friday would have made more sense to me since it marked the end of the week and the beginning of the weekend. All anyone knew was that Wednesday was the day. I sat at a table, actually, 3 tables pushed together, drinking PBR and absent-mindedly peeling the label off a bottle while watching Constance and Gary from QC dance to the jukebox music. They weren't the only couple, but my eyes never left Constance. I never danced with her, I didn't dare. I could only imagine what would happen if I ever got close enough to hold her. As I watched Gary and Constance walk across the floor, I wished to God that I wasn't the way I was. As the pieces of the label started to pile up, I remembered what made me who I am. Like many things, it all began in high school. Since the 10th grade, I dated a lot but never had a steady girlfriend. After school, I worked as a salesman in a supermarket chain. My parents gave me a car for my 16th birthday with the understanding that they would cover the plates and insurance until I turned 18, but the gas, oil, and upkeep were my responsibility. This meant work, and work didn't leave time for a permanent girlfriend. Just because I didn't have one didn't mean I didn't want one. I even knew who I wanted, but it seemed like it wasn't meant to be. Amber was a cheerleader. Although we had known each other since 6th grade and were friendly, Amber ran with the jock crowd. I was also in the athlete group, but there was a hierarchy in football. The top level consisted of quarterbacks and running backs, the second level included receivers and kickers, and the bottom level was made up of the linemen, like me, the right guard. Amber ran with the top echelon, she was consistently with the starting quarterback. I doubted Amber and I would ever get together, but it seemed the fates decided to play games with us. It was a Friday night, and we were playing an away game against Weston. It was the 4th quarter, and we were down 24-21. We had the ball at their 38-yard line with 59 seconds on the clock. We needed to get to their 25 to give our kicker a chance to tie the game and send it into overtime. Our running game was going well, and personally, I would have stuck with it, but a pass was called. The pass was intercepted. The guy who caught the ball could have simply taken a knee and ended the game, but I think he wanted to be a hero and tried to run the ball back for a touchdown. He headed towards what he thought was an open hole, and I met him there and tackled him. The ball came loose, I picked it up, and carried it to the goal line. Looking back, it was a risky move. I could have taken a knee, called a timeout, and let the quarterback and running backs try again. But I think, in the back of my mind, I was thinking the same thing the guy who intercepted the ball was thinking, I'll be a hero, or something like that. Anyway, as I was heading towards the end zone, it occurred to me that linemen aren't the fastest players, and a Weston player was closing in on me. I could see that if he caught up, it would be a good tackle and I might not make it to the goal line. Just as I was thinking about it, Mike Barnes, the tight end for whom the pass was intended, walked up to me. Without hesitation, I handed him the ball, turned, and tackled the Weston player. Mike scored, and the stands erupted with excitement as I stood up, extended my hand to the Weston player, and then received one of the biggest surprises of my young life. The fans in the stands chanted, "Dawson!" Dawson! Dawson! It's me, Robert Dawson. My teammates surrounded me, grabbed me, and carried me off the field. It was the highlight of my soccer career in both high school and college, and as strange as it may sound, it was what brought Amber and me together. I didn't know it at the time, and I don't think any of my teammates knew it, but on the eve of the game, Amber had broken up with Brad after catching him with another girl. Amber sat next to me and asked if I would go to the victory celebration. When I said yes, she asked, "Do you want to go on a date?" I replied, "With whom?" She said, "With me." "What about Brad?" I responded, "That's yesterday's news." "How about it, Bobby?" Of course, I was happy to be her date. I viewed it as a one-time deal. She no longer had a regular place and didn't want to go to the party alone, so she joined the man of the hour. Don't laugh, you know you had an ego when you were a teenager. We had a good time at the party, and she leaned in close to me as if I was her only one. I thought it might be to provoke Brad, but I was surprised when, after I took her home, she asked what I was doing on Saturday. I replied that I was working on Saturday, but when I finished work, I didn't have any plans. She said, "I don't have any plans either. Do you want to get together and find something to do?" And that's how Amber and I became a couple. Being a typical naive teenager, I assumed Amber and I would be together forever, so I was surprised when one evening she said she wanted to date other guys but assured me, "You'll still be my main boyfriend, Bobby. I just want to see someone else sometimes." I looked at her, and many thoughts flashed through my head. Finally, I said, "I don't own you, Amber, so I can't tell you what you can or can't do. If you want to date others, that's your choice. Lord knows I won't interfere. Goodbye, Amber." I got up and left. Her dad came over to where I was working the next day and started criticizing me for leaving his daughter alone. I had to get out of bed and go get her. Maybe next time she'll be smart enough to break up with her boyfriend after he brings her home instead of in the middle, I said. This shut him up, and he left the store. It nearly devastated me. The love of my life had turned her back on me. She called me several times over the next 2 days, but I just hung up. Fortunately, it happened a week before graduation, and there was so much going on that I didn't have time to focus on the situation. After graduation, I started working full-time in a store. Amber had gone east to spend the summer with relatives, so I didn't have to deal with her being around. I eventually looked around and started dating again. I met Pauline, and we hooked up for the summer. We both knew it wouldn't go anywhere since she was heading to college on the East Coast and I was staying home and going to State University. The highlight of the summer for me was oddly enough my last date with Pauline before she left for college. It was Saturday, and I had to work, so we agreed to meet at Try Corky for dinner and then try to find a couple of parties. I walked into the restaurant, and the first person I saw was Amber. She looked at me from behind her menu, smiled, and raised her hand to wave at me. I think she was shocked when I ignored her and walked past her to the back booth. Pauline arrived only a few minutes after me, and I saw her nod to Amber as she passed her. She settled down next to me and leaned in for a kiss. As I leaned in, I saw Amber watching. I gave Pauline a kiss, and then we picked up the menu and started reading. Twice while we were eating, Amber walked past us into the ladies' room. I could have sworn she wasn't just using the restroom. She had been away all summer and didn't know about me and Pauline. I think she had trouble believing we were together. We finished dinner, and Pauline said she called around and found out that the party was at Marcia Moose's place. She called Marcia and learned they were waiting for us, so we headed there. Marcia's parents were cool and trusted her, so when they went to Vegas for the weekend, they allowed her to throw a party. Furniture had been cleared from the living and dining areas to create a dance floor, and the party was in full swing when we arrived. We danced and talked for a couple of hours, and we were on the dance floor when the shouting started. "Find a room, you two. Find the back seat. Clean it up, guys. This party is rated PG." Pauline said, "Great idea, stud. Are you ready?" I replied, "Damn right, cute lady." We turned to leave, and I saw Amber standing off to the side, looking at us with a sad expression. Pauline was out of town, and I spent the week before classes started taking care of business. I saw Amber at freshman orientation, but I didn't try to talk to her since we were both business majors. It was inevitable that we would end up in many of the same classes. We were in close proximity so often that there was no point in trying to avoid her, but even so, all I did was nod in greeting as I passed by. Between my work and school, I didn't have much time to date in the first few weeks. But once things settled down, I started looking. There were a few girls I knew from high school, and some of them, like me, had their significant others move away to study elsewhere. I wasn't sure if their relationships were over until I asked them out. The first person I invited was Beverly. She agreed to the date, but by the end of the evening, she made it clear that she was still involved with Kenny Parks, who would come over for weekends, holidays, and vacations. She was honest with me about this, so I was honest with her. I mentioned that I was looking for someone interested in a relationship similar to mine. She smiled and extended her hand, saying, "Deal," and we shook hands. We continued to see each other in between my other dates. Nancy was next. She made it clear that her previous relationship was over, and we dated several times. On our fifth date, she expressed that she wasn't easy to get but was struggling with her past relationship. We spent 6 good weeks together, but she later told me she had met someone she wanted to get to know better. She said, "Honestly, we're just friends with benefits. There's no real spark between us, but we can still be friends." I agreed, and we parted on good terms. I went back to dating Beverly while continuing my search. Helen was next, and our relationship was similar to the one I had with Nancy until it ended for the same reason. So, I went back to Beverly. One night, I asked Beverly what she wanted, and she said she was looking for a casual relationship. It turned out she had received a letter from Kenny, saying he had found his soulmate and would no longer come home on weekends. I took her to bed, and for the entire semester and first month of summer vacation, Beverly and I were a couple. I was about to ask her if she wanted to make our relationship permanent when she told me she couldn't see me anymore. Kenny's relationship with his soulmate had fallen apart, and he returned, asking Beverly to give him another chance. Unfortunately, she did, and he ended up betraying her again. 3 weeks into our second year, Beverly tried to reconnect with me, but I wasn't interested. A week had passed since Beverly's attempt to return when I was sitting in the student cafe, drinking coffee and reviewing class notes. Someone sat down across from me. I looked up and saw Amber. "Have you calmed down yet? Are you done with all these other girls? We belong together, Bobby, and you know it. You knew it that night at the football game. We were right for each other, and it was obvious to everyone." She added, "Okay, I did something foolish. Are you going to tell me you've never done anything really foolish and regretted it?" I just sat there, and finally, she said, "Come on, Bob, say something. Are you doing anything tonight?" I replied that I wasn't. "Then let's spend the evening together," she suggested. And just like that, we were together again. We made it through graduation without any issues, and a month after graduation, we got married. The next 2 years were wonderful. We were both advancing in our careers, and we decided to wait 5 years before having children, actively saving money to buy a house. The only downside was that Amber's job required frequent travel, maybe 3 or 4 days a month, but still days I would have preferred to spend at home with her. I'll never forget June 8, 2002. Amber returned from a 2-day business trip and was waiting for me at home when I came back from work. She prepared dinner and opened a bottle of wine to let it breathe. Amber was passionate about wine. She would sniff the cork, let the wine breathe, and observe the drop in the glass. I often joked about it, but not that day. She seemed to have a romantic evening planned, and I didn't want to ruin the mood. She served dinner and poured the wine. We didn't usually talk while eating, so the silence didn't bother me. After our meal, I filled our glasses with wine and waited. Usually, at this moment, she would say, "Dessert will be served in the bedroom," but this time she said, "We need to talk, Bobby." I said, "Of course, my love. What about?" She replied, "This is hard for me, Bobby. I tried to find a better way to do this, but I just have to say it straight. I want a divorce." This took me by surprise. I hadn't noticed any problems in our marriage, but then it hit me. I said, "Sorry," standing up and rushing to the toilet. I left the door open so she could hear me, though I wasn't actually crying. I tried to portray it convincingly. What dawned on me was that it must be another man, since I could account for all of Amber's time except when she was at work. The man had to be her coworker. I knew 2 other guys who had faced similar situations, and both said they wished they had some evidence to use in court. If they had, they would have been in a better financial position after the divorce. I used my excuse of going to the bathroom to retrieve the cassette recorder I was using for notes from my briefcase. I returned to the table and sat down, taking a sip of wine. I said, "Sorry about that." It was a shock. "Why? What did I do?" Amber replied, "You didn't do anything, Bobby. It's not you, it's me. I just stopped loving you. That's all. I just stopped loving you." "Who is he?" I asked. "It doesn't matter, Bobby. It matters to me, Amber. We've only been married 2 years. That's not enough for you to stop loving me without someone else being involved. Who is he? It doesn't matter to you. Just accept it, please. Just accept that I don't want to be with you anymore and let me go." "I can't do this, Amber. If you're going to end our relationship, you should at least tell me why." "It's not because of you, Bobby. It's all because of me." "Who, Amber? Who is he?" "Brian Lates, your new boss." "How did this happen?" "Oh, now I see. You 2 met on one of your business trips. Did you at least use protection so you didn't bring anything home?" "It wasn't like that, Bobby." "Well then, tell me how it was." "We were having dinner with a client, and Brian was sitting across from me. At some point, our eyes met, and there was a spark between us. After the client left, we sat and talked for hours. We're soulmates, Bobby. We're meant for each other. It's funny. I seem to remember sitting across the table from you a couple of years ago when you said those same words to me. In fact, your exact words were, 'We're meant to be together and you know it.' You knew it that night at the football game. Do you remember that? Please, Bobby, don't make this any harder than it already is. Is he better in bed than me? He's not better, just different. But it's not about physical attraction, it's a matter of our souls being in tune with each other. How many times did you come home to me after that?" "Only a couple of times, Bobby. But again, it's not about the physical aspect." "And how do you see this going forward?" "I've already hired a lawyer, and he's preparing papers for a divorce based on irreconcilable differences. We'll have an even division of property, and I'm not asking for alimony." At that moment, the doorbell rang, and Amber said, "I think this is for you." I went to the door and opened it, seeing a stranger standing there. "Robert Dawson?" he asked. I said yes. He handed me an envelope and said, "You've been served the documents." I returned to the table and threw the envelope on him, saying, "You're not wasting your time, are you?" It wasn't planned, but the envelope hit Amber's glass, knocking it over and spilling red wine into her lap, possibly ruining one of her favorite dresses. "Oh," I said, heading into the bedroom. I packed a bag with my things for a couple of days and headed out the door. "Where are you going?" Amber asked. "Away from this situation," I replied, and walked out the door. I checked into a Marriott and requested a wake-up call for 7 a.m. At 9 o'clock, I was at the bank when it opened. I needed to see what Amber had left me. Amber's lawyer probably wasn't worth what she was paying him because he apparently hadn't advised her to manage her banking before serving me the paperwork. Imagine my surprise when I saw that all the accounts remained untouched. I quickly changed that, leaving $2 in each account, $1 for each year of our marriage. I went to another bank and opened a checking account with half the money, then went to a third bank and rented a deposit box for the remaining money. I wasn't sure if they could track my accounts, but I didn't want to take any risks. I didn't think they would suspect I had opened accounts at 2 different banks. After all, it wasn't a fortune, just $16,000. The next step was work. I told my boss what had happened and that I needed a few days to sort things out. He said to take the rest of the week and referred me to our company's legal department to get a recommendation for a divorce lawyer. Dave from the legal department told me that his brother Chuck was the lawyer I needed and called him to set up an appointment for the same day. The next step was to go to a store where I bought 3 voice-activated recorders. I returned to the apartment, making sure Amber's car was gone, and went inside to retrieve the items I had missed the night before. I placed the recorders in locations where they could capture as much information as possible. I also took the envelope from the table where it was still lying. I read it over cake and coffee at the village and while waiting to see my lawyer. It was just as Amber had said, equal division of property, with each side keeping their cars, and she didn't ask for alimony. My meeting with Dave's brother Chuck was enlightening. I learned that we live in a state with a no-fault divorce policy, but it is one of the few states where you can file a lawsuit for alienation of affections. He also noted that if the company were involved, there is a policy and procedure manual that contains ethical standards, and we could potentially hold the company accountable for not following these rules. I provided him with a recording of a conversation with Amber, and after listening to it, he confirmed that we had enough material for further action. He then asked me what I wanted to achieve. I smiled and said, expose them and make them face consequences. He said he would take care of it right away. I spent the rest of the day searching for an apartment. I found one not far from work, completed the necessary paperwork, and moved in. I didn't want to take anything out of the old apartment, so I visited Goodwill and bought everything I needed to settle in. When I left the old apartment, I turned off my phone and only turned it on briefly before turning it off again. There were a few missed messages and voicemails from Amber, but I deleted them without listening. When I returned to work the following week, there were 39 while you were out messages and Maxine, my secretary, begging me to address the situation with Amber. I picked up the phone and called Amber. Thank you for calling the offices of Harper Walden and Associates. How can I connect you? The operator asked. Is this person already there? I asked. I'm sorry, is my estranged wife still there? The one who was involved with her boss during trips or long lunches? There was a brief pause before Amber came on the line. This is Amber. How can I help you? Isn't it telling that I didn't mention your name, yet the operator knew who I was referring to as soon as I mentioned the affair with her boss? Why are you calling me? Everything that needed to be said was said after dinner last week. I don't want to talk to you, Amber. In fact, I'd be fine if I never saw you again. Stop trying to contact me. I won't take your calls. I wish you a difficult life. I couldn't wait to share this interaction with my lawyer. By recording our conversations, I decided it would be in my best interest to document all of my interactions with Amber. Was I curious about what she had to say? Of course, but not excessively so. The next day, Chuck called me and informed me that the documents were ready for delivery and asked how I wanted to proceed. We decided that the documents would be delivered to Amber and Brian Lates at work the next day. I filed for divorce from Amber based on her infidelity and also filed a lawsuit against Lates for emotional distress. After they both received the documents in front of as many of her colleagues as possible, a courier delivered the documents to a company representative. Somehow, Chuck obtained a copy of the company's policies and procedures manual, which included ethical standards. One section explicitly stated that relationships between managers and subordinates were prohibited. Therefore, the company was also held accountable for not adhering to its own rules, which contributed to the breakdown of my marriage. The next day, when I arrived at work, I told Maxine that Amber would call after 2, which was when the presentation was scheduled. Of course, the call came at 2:10. What do you want, Amber? Why did you do that, Bobby? I thought you loved me. Love, Amber? Until you left me for your boss, I thought we had something real. It didn't have to be like this, Bobby. I still have feelings for you. Be serious, Amber, and stop living in fantasies. I don't know what you expected me to do after your actions, but you should have known I wouldn't go away quietly. You started this process, so face the consequences. Did you have to involve Lates as well? Of course, that person made a move on my wife. He knew you were married and did it anyway, so he has to face repercussions. This isn't the 18th century where I could challenge him to a duel. I had to take legal action. Believe me, Amber, I would have preferred more severe actions, but I don't want to end up in jail. I've said this before, I don't want to hear your voice anymore. I wish you a difficult life. I hung up and returned to work. Then, events began to unfold on their own. The company claimed the lawsuit against them was baseless and that they had no control over their employees' actions outside the office. Chuck played them a recording of my phone conversation with Amber and pointed out that the operator connected the call without mentioning a name, yet everyone in the building seemed to know who I was referring to. The company made an offer, which Chuck said was probably the best we could get without going to trial, where a bad jury could rule against us. Since I didn't care whether the company paid me or not, I told Chuck to accept their offer. My only goal in filing the lawsuit was to bring Amber and Lates to their attention, and I was successful in that. Lates was terminated, but Amber was able to keep her job. Later, I found out that Amber claimed Lates had threatened her job if she didn't comply. I knew this was false because I had heard her talk about soulmates. Although Lates was left without work and without a salary, he had significant assets. He owned his home and several investments. But he was still determined to fight to the end. No jury will rule in your favor in this case. You have no evidence other than the statements of an emotionally distressed individual, he said. Chuck smiled and responded, the statements of an emotionally distressed individual and your own statements. Then he played the recordings for Lates. Oh, right, remember the 3 voice recorders I placed in the apartment? 2 days after I handed the documents to the couple, I returned to the apartment and retrieved them. I didn't try to record phone conversations because Amber often used her phone on speaker while multitasking. The first significant conversation took place the evening after I set up the voice recorders. He's back? No, and I don't think he'll come back. Are you sure he won't cause any trouble? He'll accept it. My Bobby isn't the type to stay where he's not wanted. That doesn't mean he won't be upset enough to seek retribution. Not my Bobby. I know him. He doesn't have a vindictive bone in his body. He'll do the same thing he did in high school, ignore me and move on. No backbone, huh? I didn't say that. Now that he's out of the picture, can we spend more time together? Lunch breaks and business trips aren't enough. I need more of you. We can't do this here. He might decide to come back, and I don't want him to catch us. No problem, dear. We're just leaving work and heading to my place. You can get used to the place since I'm going to move in with you anyway. Now that he's out of the picture, we can forget about quick lunchtime meetings and spend quality time together. I like the sound of that, but my lawyer advised me not to do anything that Bobby could find out and use against me. Why worry? You said it yourself, he'll ignore you and move on. Admit it, dear, he's not strong. A real man wouldn't just walk away, he'd confront the situation. That's why you chose me, you needed someone stronger in your life. Well, if you think it's okay, I can spend the night at your place tomorrow. The second important conversation occurred in the evening after the documents were delivered. You said he'd leave. You said he'd just ignore you and move on. I don't understand. This is nothing like my Bobby. I thought he was incapable of causing me harm. It's too late to worry about that now. We need to focus on damage control. What do you mean? It seems that after we received the documents, the company did too. For what? For not adhering to rules and procedures. I don't understand. Have you ever read the policies? No, it sounded like a lot of legal jargon to me. There are ethical standards and a whole section about the behavior of managers with subordinates. Beeman wants to see me in his office tomorrow morning, and that could be problematic. Why? Because they might decide that my relationship with you is inappropriate, and if they decide to take action, I could get demoted. This is absurd. How can a company interfere in the personal lives of 2 people who care about each other? I laughed out loud at his next words. Are you sure you graduated with a degree in business management? Of course. How can you even ask me that? Did you skip all your business law classes? There was more to it, but the point is that Lates agreed to admit that he threatened to fire Amber if she didn't comply with his demands during their trips. If asked, he wouldn't deny it, which would allow her to keep her job. After Chuck took his fee, I still had $889,000 and an ex-wife in my past. Amber and I were no longer together. Lates was still in the picture, but I wasn't interested in knowing the details. 6 months after the divorce, Amber called me. Bobby, I made a big mistake. I miss you. Can we meet and talk about it? No, Amber. How many times do I have to say that I don't want to see you or hear your voice again? I hung up. So, back to her with her brown eyes and flaming red hair. We were at Antonio's, a bar near our work, where we'd go for a drink after work on Wednesdays to unwind and discuss the latest management issues. The bar had a jukebox and a dance floor, with live music from Thursday to Saturday. Someone was always putting coins into the machine. The women I worked with loved to dance, often dragging guys out of their seats. I danced with them, but I never initiated contact. Most of them were married, engaged, or had boyfriends, so I didn't ask other women for anything, not even a simple dance. The only exception was Constance. If she asked, I politely declined, saying I had other commitments. It was 6:30, and we'd been there since 5. By 6:45, the group began to disperse. Constance and I remained, sitting at 3 tables pushed together with a lot of space between us. I could have gotten up and walked to the end of the table and joined her, but I didn't. I was concerned it might seem like I was trying to make a move on her. It's funny, I knew that, but you have to understand, maybe not understand, but realize how much Amber affected me. What she did impacted how I view women and how I behave around them. I had just decided to get up and go home when Constance stood up, walked over to me, and sat down next to me. Time for the truth, Bob. There's no one here, so why don't you tell me why you don't show any interest in me? Or maybe it's not a matter of interest, maybe you're afraid of me. Come on, Bob, open up. I might be a bit unconventional when it comes to relationships, but I'm not awkward or shy around them. Why do you think I'm not interested in you or that I'm afraid of you? Just the way you avoid me. You don't dance with me, even when I ask, and when we pass each other in the hallways at work, you look away. I'm not shy or reserved, Bob. I know how I am, and I'm used to people being around me. I've seen the way you look at me, and I admit I like attention. When I come across someone who treats me the way you do, I have to ask why. The only 2 reasons I can think of are that you're not interested in me or you're afraid of me for some reason. Well, you're partly right. Fear is part of it. Afraid of yourself? That doesn't even make sense. Perhaps not for you, but it's true. Come on, Bob, open up. You can't tell me something like that and leave me in the dark. You know I'll go crazy if I don't find out. I wondered what could go wrong. I'm concerned about what I might do if I become friends with you. That doesn't make much sense to me. That's because you don't understand the influence you have on me. I started explaining my feelings and why I avoid relationships with people who are already in them. She burst out laughing. Would you kill me? Well, I'm pretty upset with my husband right now, but I don't think I'd take you up on your offer to remove him. The waitress came over, and Constance ordered us another drink. As soon as the waitress left, Constance said, "You could be the one I need in my life, Bob, a supportive friend who I can rely on without worrying about unwanted advances." You missed the point, Ms. Frederick. My concern is that I might not be able to control myself around you. How about you don't worry about it and let me take charge? Now that we've cleared that up, what are you doing on Friday? Nothing planned. So, my husband is away in Seattle for 2 weeks for training, and I need to attend a charity event. If I go alone, I'll be approached all evening. I need a trustworthy escort, and that's you. Whatever you need. What I need is a suit, a tie, and a desire to keep me away from those who want to be inappropriate with me. But I'm one of those people, so I need to stay away from you. Stop it, Bobby. I understand now, you want to be close to me, but you won't make a move. We both know it. The only way you can avoid being my date is to say you don't want to be seen with someone like me. So, Bobby, what will it be? I took a deep breath, told myself I was being irrational, and asked, what time and where? When she opened the door to greet me at 6 o'clock on Friday, it took all my self-control not to let my excitement get the better of me. She looked absolutely stunning in her little black dress and 4-inch heels. She literally left me speechless. The earth is calling Bobby. Come in, Bobby. Her appearance brought me back to reality. Damn it, you sure know how to boost a person's self-esteem. The charity event was a dinner and dance. Tickets were $100 each, and all proceeds went to various charities. I wasn't particularly surprised to see James Cambridge, the president and CEO of Cambridge Enterprises, and my boss, since it was well known that he supported many charities. What really surprised me was that after dinner and all the speeches, when the music started, he came to our table and asked if he could dance with my date. I looked at Constance, and she nodded that it was okay. So, I said, not at all. In fact, I think she'd enjoy dancing with someone who doesn't have 2 left feet and won't step on her toes. He offered her his hand, and they went to the dance floor. They stayed for 2 songs. Although they didn't dance closely, they talked a lot. He could have been just another person interested in her, but I doubted it, especially since his wife was with him at the event. I considered approaching his wife to ask her to dance, but then I reconsidered. I was new to these events and wasn't familiar with all the social norms. I looked around the room full of influential people and realized that I was not on their level, which led me to wonder, what does a lower-level secretary do at such an event? Constance seemed to know several people there, and none of them required me to stand between them and Constance. And how did she know Mr. Cambridge? All questions I didn't mean to ask. Mr. Cambridge brought her back to me and thanked me for letting him dance with her. Dawson, right? Yes, sir. No, please call me Jim. He offered me his hand, and I shook it. Constance stood smiling at me as if I had passed some kind of test. As Mr. Cambridge left, she took my hand and said, "Now it's our turn, Mr. 2 Left Feet." She led me to the dance floor, and we began dancing. I wasn't a bad dancer, and Constance and I moved well together. She smiled at me, but her gaze was mischievous as she pulled me closer. "You don't want people here to think my date lacks enthusiasm, do you? Why are you doing this to me?" I asked. "Because I can, and it's fun. Tell me you don't want me." "Go ahead, Bobby, lie to me and say you don't." I know I've talked about my reservations regarding women who are already in relationships and how I avoid them, but that doesn't mean I'm timid in their presence. I've already explained how I feel around you, Constance. Actually, I prefer Connie, she corrected me once, but I continued using Constance. If you push the wrong button, you might activate something better left untouched. Constance pressed that button. All you have to do is say, "Do it." She tried to push me away and said, "You can't speak to me like that." "What's wrong, Connie? You can dish it out but can't handle it?" "I've told you I don't like being called Connie." "I don't care, Mrs. Frederick. To me, you're Connie." The group announced a short break, and I led us back to our table. When we sat down, Constance said, "What happened to my reliable companion? What happened to the Bobby I thought I knew?" "Don't act innocent, Mrs. Frederick. You knew exactly what you were doing when you pushed my buttons, so don't be surprised by my reaction." She looked at me for a moment and then asked, "Would you really have taken me on the dance floor in front of everyone?" "You didn't say do it, so we'll never know. But I can tell you that at that moment, the likelihood would have been very high. I guess I'll have to be careful with my reliable companion." She got up to go to the ladies' room, and as I watched her leave, I wondered if I would have had the courage to act if she had explicitly asked. With anyone else, I would have known it wasn't a serious request, but with Constance, it was different. The band returned and started playing just as Constance came out of the restroom. Jim intercepted her, and they headed to the dance floor. I was watching them dance when I heard a voice say, "Excuse me," and saw Jim's wife standing there. "I think it's only fair that you dance with me since my husband is dancing with your date." I wasn't going to refuse the boss's wife, so I stood up and offered her my hand. As we walked towards the dance floor, she introduced herself as Stacy, and I introduced myself in return. We got on the dance floor just as the song was ending, and Stacy said, "We're already here, so we might as well stay for the next song." The band started the next song, and I took Stacy's hands, and we began to dance. "I just wanted to let you know that you don't have to worry about Jim trying to make advances on your friend. I have him on a short leash. Actually, Constance and I are not a couple. She needed someone to accompany her to this event, and she hired me. She said she needed someone to stand between her and all the men who might approach her if she came alone. Yes, I can understand that. However, you two look good together, and from my perspective, she seems to be interested in you." "I doubt it. She's married, and I'm only with her because her husband is in Seattle and can't be with her today." Stacy looked at me with an unreadable expression. When the song ended, I led her back to her table, and we met Jim returning Constance to our table. We swapped partners, and I returned Constance to her place. As soon as we sat down, Constance wanted to know how I became Stacy's dance partner. She came up and asked, "Did you really think I would run away and leave you with a broken heart?" I looked at her and said, "I was worried you might. Thank you for making sure I didn't have to." She glanced under the table, then looked at me again, saying, "You're at it again, Bob. Let's go dance." This time, there was no pulling me close, and we maintained a respectful distance from each other. We danced to 2 songs in a row, and then I had to use the restroom. When I returned to the table, I saw a man standing next to Constance, talking to her. Judging by her expression, she was not pleased. I approached and said, "Sorry, but you're blocking my space." He ignored me and said to Constance, "How about this?" She didn't respond, but I did. "I asked you politely to move away from my seat, but that didn't seem to work. So, I won't be polite this time. Either move, or I'll make a scene." He gave me a dirty look but left. "One of the people you wanted me to protect you from," I said. "Exactly. And you did great." Over the course of the evening, I got answers to some of my questions. People came to our table to greet Constance. It turned out she was the secretary-treasurer of one of the charities receiving funds from the event. As mentioned, Jim was a big supporter of charities, which is probably why they knew each other. As the evening drew to a close, I drove Constance home. I walked her to the door, and as I turned to leave, she grabbed me and kissed me. She said, "Thanks, Bob. I had a great time. See you at work on Monday." I hadn't even made it a block from her house before I had to pull over to the side of the road and collect myself. All weekend, I thought about that Friday night and wished Constance wasn't married. On Monday at work, Constance was in her usual cheerful mood and even joined me at the table in the break room when I took a coffee and donut break at 10 in the morning. We didn't mention our Friday date. Instead, we discussed the usual office rumors and gossip. The break ended, and we went back to work. I didn't see her until Wednesday at Antonio's. As usual, 3 tables were pushed together, and I was sitting, sipping my beer, when Constance came in, walked over to me, and sat down next to me. She ordered from the waitress, turned to me, and said, "Go put some money in the jukebox, Bobby. I want to dance." I just looked at her for a couple of seconds and then said, "You prefer Constance over Connie, and I prefer Bob over Bobby." She was silent for a moment and then said, "Please, Bob, put some money in the jukebox." I stood up, walked over to the machine, and put in some coins. When I turned to go back to the table, I found Constance standing behind me. When the music started, she took my hand and led me to the dance floor. As soon as we were dancing, she said, "I knew you wouldn't ask me, so I decided to take the initiative and ask myself." "Why?" "I already told you I need a dependable male friend, and you've been chosen. You know what you're doing to me, and it doesn't bother you at all that I'm struggling?" "You're not struggling, Bob. You're enjoying it, and you know it. The girl you want gives you more than you have any right to expect, and you soak up everything you can get." I thought she was right, but I still couldn't understand why she was making me feel this way. We stayed on the dance floor for 2 songs in a row, then returned to the table. For the next 15 minutes, we sat, drank, and discussed the latest management nonsense. Then a slow song started playing, and Gary asked Constance to dance, but she turned him down. "Bob just asked me to dance," she said, pulling me out of my chair and leading me to the dance floor. "What's going on here?" I asked. "Gary is one of those guys who tries to hit on me. There are 2 other guys here tonight who keep trying to get me into the parking lot, so I'm dancing with my reliable man to keep them away. Have you ever considered that your dependable man has limits, and if they are crossed, he may not be so reliable?" "Of course I have. I realized it last Friday. I admit I spent most of my weekend wondering what it would be like to be with you on the dance floor. I didn't say it out loud, but I thought the same thing. We danced to one more song, and then she said she had to go and asked me to walk her to the car. I thought it would be a good time for me to leave too, so I said I would. On the way to her car, she asked if I would stop for coffee with her. I need to talk to someone about a problem I'm facing, and I think you're the one I need to talk to. Curious, I agreed. We met at the Village Inn, and after our coffee was served, Constance said, "You already know that I can be straightforward and even a little pushy, so I'll say it right away. I want you to be my boyfriend." I didn't know what I was expecting to hear, but it certainly wasn't this. "Did you forget that you're married?" "You didn't hear a word I said about why I avoid men in relationships. Just hear me out, Bob. My husband is away more than he is home due to business trips, seminars, conferences, and the like. He basically becomes a husband by absence. I need a man to accompany me when I go somewhere or do something. You saw what happened last Friday, and it happened even though I was with someone. Imagine what would have happened if I had come alone. There are other men I could ask, but they would do it hoping to get something more. I need someone dependable. It's you, Bob. Everyone saw me leave with you today, so if I hint at work tomorrow that we are a couple, Gary, Ron, Paul, and the rest will stop hitting on me, afraid you will react. On Wednesdays, they won't try to drag me onto the dance floor to provoke you or bother you. At least once or twice a week, I'll have some sort of social event, and I'll need someone to do what you did last Friday, someone who won't expect anything from me at the end of the evening. It's you, Bob. It's a win for you. You'll get to spend time with me, hold me while we dance, and have some public displays of affection to confirm we're a couple. Plus, I'll cover all expenses, and you'll meet people at social events who can help with your career. How do you like this offer?" "No, Constance, I don't like it. You already know how I feel about being involved with another woman, and while you may think you can control everything and expect me to behave around you, I'm not sure I can. You're the woman who can make me do what I swore I'd never do. You've already seen how close to the edge I can get when I'm around you. Besides, I have a personal life. Although I don't have a steady girlfriend right now, I date 2 women regularly and have another one with whom I have a casual relationship. They take up a significant portion of my free time, and I definitely won't cancel a date if I have a prior commitment and suddenly need to be available for some event." She sat and looked at me in silence for a few seconds, then said, "Okay, how about this? For the guy part, I might start hinting that we had a relationship and plan to continue it. Maybe from time to time we'll let someone see our closeness, and we'll do this a couple of times a week. No one will know that we don't see each other after work or on weekends. Next Wednesday, when we leave the bar, we'll have a staged makeout session in the parking lot, and then the rumors and gossip will do their job. Is that okay?" I thought about it for a moment or two and then said, "I could agree to that. For the other part, I usually know 2 to 3 weeks in advance, and I can give you my schedule so you can plan your dates around it. Please, Bob, I really need your help." Given my attitude towards Constance, it was difficult for me to refuse her, and in the end, I agreed to try. Thus began the strangest 3 months of my life. The next day at work, Constance dropped hints to the other women in the office. I don't know what she told them, but I started getting looks from colleagues that I hadn't gotten before. At lunch, I was sitting in the lounge with Constance and noticed that Gary and Ron were giving me unfriendly looks, while Alice, May, and Belinda were giving me curious looks. Twice during the day, Constance and I had the opportunity to be close, and we exchanged kisses. On Friday, we repeated what we did on Thursday, and as we were leaving work, Constance said to me in front of several colleagues, "I'm really looking forward to spending the weekend with you, love." I spent the weekend with April, a friend with whom I had a casual relationship, and she benefited from all the frustration that Constance had built up in me over the past week. On Monday, Tuesday, and throughout Wednesday, we repeated what we had done the previous Thursday and Friday. On Wednesday at Antonio's, Constance sat next to me, danced every dance with me, and refused all other offers. Near the time we usually left, Constance said, "I want to leave now before everyone else starts leaving. I want them to see us kissing when they leave the bar." I walked her to the car, and as I was about to sit in the front seat, she said, "No, let's sit in the back. We need to make it look real." We climbed into the back seat, and she leaned back facing the exit. I hesitated, and she said, "Just do it. We both have pants on, everything we do is staged." I reluctantly did as she asked. She was looking at the door and suddenly grabbed my head, pulling it towards her. "Alice and Belinda are coming," she said. I know this is a bad idea. I have to make you finish what you started, but I think it served its purpose. Those who saw must believe that we are a couple now. I need to leave and go somewhere to address my issue. We can't just break up, it would look unnatural. Sit down and pretend to be affectionate, and I'll do the same. We followed her suggestion. I managed to maintain control. When I got out of the car, she asked, "Will you stop for coffee at the Village Inn?" "No, thank you, Mrs. Frederick. You've already ruined my evening enough. It will never happen again." Got it? If that doesn't convince them, that's their problem. She nodded in agreement, and I walked to my car and drove out of the parking lot. I drove 2 blocks, turned onto a side street, stopped at the curb, and collected myself. We became the talk of the town at work after that night in the parking lot. We continued our act over the following weeks but didn't repeat the parking lot scene. Instead, as we prepared to leave, Constance would say, "I'll see you at your place, love," and I would smile at her and nod. We were affectionate at work and sometimes had flirtatious dances at Antonio's. I accompanied her to several events and really had to stand between her and those who wanted to flirt with her. One of these guys even crossed the line, and I had to use physical force to push him away. I think it sent a message to the others that they shouldn't bother Constance when I'm around. I met several influential people and made contacts that helped me in my work. I also noticed that Jim Cambridge was at almost every event and was always talking to Constance. Constance was promoted to assistant office manager, but that didn't change the way we interacted with our colleagues. My time with Constance left me in a near-constant state of frustration, and the only thing that made it bearable was that I had Judy, Gail, 2 women I dated periodically, and April to help relieve the tension. Then came the night when I began to suspect I was being deceived. We were at another charity event, and there was a guy who couldn't leave Constance alone, no matter how many times she told him no or how many times I asked him to stop bothering her. He kept coming back and asking her to dance. Finally, I got tired of it. When he came back again, I stood up and confronted him. "Get out of here. I'm tired of you pestering my companion. Leave and don't come back, or I'll make sure you regret it." He looked at me and turned to leave. He never returned, but the mood was soured, and Constance and I decided it was time to leave. We stopped for coffee and discussed a cocktail party she was going to and needed an escort for. The guy from the charity event came in, saw us, and came up to our table. He sat down next to Constance without invitation and said to me, "Do you want to step outside and settle this one-on-one? I'm ready, but don't talk to me about my lady. She's not your lady, she's married and not to you. I think if she can date you, she can be with me too." He turned to Constance and said, "I've wanted you for a long time and I think I have something you'll like." This guy was arrogant, and I wanted to confront him physically, but I knew if I did, someone would likely call the police and I'd end up in trouble. Instead, I decided to handle it differently. Since he was focused on Constance, he didn't notice my signal to her, hoping she would support my plan. I said, "I don't know if she's tried it, but I'd like to see if she can handle it. We've been talking about the possibility of something. How about it, Connie? Do you want to try it?" "I don't know, maybe he's just bragging," Constance replied. The guy laughed and said, "That's easy to prove. Let's go to the parking lot." Constance looked at me, and I nodded. She said, "Let's go," and we headed to the parking lot. My goal was to get him to a place where we couldn't be seen and then confront him. Maybe this would teach him that bothering other people's partners is dangerous. As we went behind a dumpster where we couldn't be seen, the guy said, "How about some proof? Show me something to make me believe you weren't just trying to trick me." I had already clenched my fists and was ready to act when Constance said, "I can handle this," and her hand came out of her purse. The click of the switchblade was almost inaudible, but it was enough to make the guy run. He was already a few feet away, running as if his life depended on escaping Constance, which, to some extent, was true. I stood and looked at Constance as she put the knife away. I noticed a strap hanging from the end of the knife and recognized it. I had bought a similar one for Amber years ago. It was actually a can of pepper spray. Yes, something was definitely wrong, and I intended to find out exactly what. She buttoned up her blouse and said, "It was a memorable evening and gave me a few things to think about the next time you push me too far." She then came over and kissed me on the cheek. You won't always be around, and a girl needs to be prepared. I took her home, received another kiss on the cheek, and returned to my place. On the way, another thought occurred to me. After seeing what Constance demonstrated, I began to wonder how Mr. Frederick could leave such a treasure at home so often. He can't be that smart, I thought. This led me to question why Constance would tolerate a husband who was away so frequently. When I got home, I took out the phone book and looked up the Fredericks. There were several listed, but only one at 1745 Morningside. The name was Constance Frederick, with no mention of Steve Frederick. The next day was Sunday, a non-working day for Cambridge Enterprises. I had the key to the office and went inside. I headed to HR, found where Janice hid the keys, took them out, and opened the filing cabinets to find Constance's folder. I took it and sat down at Janice's desk to look through the contents. It showed an MBA from Wharton and a role as a secretary, with no spouse listed. The emergency contacts section included the names James and Stacy Cambridge, listed as aunt and uncle. I was deceived. All of us who worked there had been deceived. As I put the folder back, I wondered about my next step. I wasn't too surprised by what I found because I already suspected something was off, which is why I checked her folder in the first place. The biggest surprise was Janice, one of the biggest gossips in the company, who hadn't said a word about Constance. The information revealed what Constance was doing. She started as a secretary, then became an assistant office manager, and her next step would be office manager. From there, she would be transferred to accounting, purchasing, production, and the shipping and receiving department. She was being groomed to take over when Uncle Jim retired. She studied the company from the very bottom. The question remained unanswered: why was she involving me? Constance could manage just fine on her own. It might be true that if she were with me, most guys would leave her alone, but any man could fill that role, so why me? In fact, why was anyone needed at all? I was confident that Constance, who I saw during the incident with the man who was hitting on her, could handle the situation on her own and would make it clear that anyone who didn't interest her should stay away. No, Bobby, Miss Frederick was playing with me, and the question was why and what to do about it. I spent the rest of Sunday thinking about it, and when I came into work on Monday, I still didn't have a clear plan of action. One thing I knew for sure was that I was no longer going to be Constance's setup person. Having found out that she was single, I could have pursued her, but I had no intention of doing so. If she had any interest in me, she would have shown it somehow in the last 3 months. Because of my feelings for Constance, I needed to distance myself from her. I enjoyed stopping after work for drinks at Antonio's on Wednesdays with my coworkers, but I was going to stop going there. Constance would be there, and I wouldn't be able to avoid her at work. This wouldn't be a big problem since she would be in the administration building and I would be in the offices of the manufacturing plant. I spent most of my workday on Tuesday organizing and setting up my new position. I also called Tom Mix into my office and offered him the position of production manager, which he accepted. On Wednesday, I was busy meeting with the heads of the purchasing, quality control, shipping and receiving, and production departments. I skipped Wednesday at Antonio's and instead had dinner at Trey's, followed by a couple of cocktails at the Soft Spot, my favorite sports bar. As usual, I turned off my cell phone while dining out and forgot to turn it back on when I left the restaurant. When I returned home, I found 2 messages on my answering machine, both from Constance, which I deleted without listening. I was surprised that she called my home phone instead of her cell phone. I took it out and saw it was turned off. I turned it on and saw that I had several messages from Constance, which I also deleted. I watched TV in silence and then went to bed. On Thursday at 9 o'clock, my secretary called me and said there were 3 calls from Mrs. Frederick on the line. Since I was at work and the call could have been work-related, I had to answer. "How can I help you, Mrs. Frederick?" I emphasized Mrs. Frederick, but it either didn't get through to Constance or she didn't care because she said, "Where were you last night?" "I had dinner, had a drink, and went home." "Why do you ask?" "I needed to talk to you about the Humane Society fundraiser on Friday." "Sorry, Mrs. Frederick, but my days of pretending to be a boyfriend are over. You need to find someone else to accompany you. Now, if you don't mind, I have a lot of work to do and need to get back to it." And I hung up. I thought my manner of communication was somewhat aggressive towards the woman who might one day become my boss. Of course, I did, but I needed to let her know that she couldn't use me. I was young enough to start over if necessary, so it was better to push back now than later. The day passed quickly, and I was about to leave when Constance walked into my office. "How can I help you, Mrs. Frederick?" "First of all, stop acting like a resentful teenager. We need to talk, either over cocktails or dinner. Your choice. I could use a couple of cocktails right now. Meet me at Antonio's in 15 minutes. I nodded in agreement, and she left. She was sitting in a booth in the back when I arrived, and I joined her. We ordered drinks from the waitress, and when she left, Constance said, "Okay, Bob, what's going on with you?" Anyone who graduated from Wharton should be smart enough to understand that. Let's pretend I didn't graduate from Wharton and I'm not smart enough. What's the problem? In short, the problem is that you deliberately played with my feelings. Explain it to me. Why? You knew how I felt about you. You knew and used it against me. You knew I would never pursue a woman who was already involved, and you used that to your advantage. You knew perfectly well how much it hurt to be around you, knowing that I could never have you. You didn't care about the pain you were causing me by being around me. You only cared that I was someone you could manipulate. I learned the truth, Miss Frederick, and it didn't make me happy. You don't like my attitude? Well, Miss Frederick, you asked for it. Live with it. Do you want to know why? What's the point of this? I don't know. It's up to you. It all started that night when I joined you at the other end of the table. I liked what I saw and decided I wanted to get to know you better. When you told me why you were avoiding me, I started wondering if this was true or just a clever tactic to get to me. I had a lot of people interested in me, and I learned to recognize those who were more interested in my resources than in me. Of course, this was when I was in school, not here. When I graduated and returned here to continue my education, I decided it was better to say I was married to keep people at a distance. Anyone who approached me knowing this was automatically considered unsuitable. This allowed me to look around and find someone I genuinely liked. I noticed you constantly observing me but doing nothing, so I decided to take the first step. You shared your story, and I decided to verify its truth. Whether it was true or not, this led to our complicated situation. After 3 months of being with me and not making any advances, I realized you were genuine and began planning how to approach you. I was trying to figure out how to get out of the predicament I had created with the pretense of being married. When things went awry, you somehow figured it out. In a way, this was beneficial because I could stop worrying about how to navigate the false marriage story, but it was also problematic because you became defensive. I decided to take a chance and make the first move again, which is why I wanted to sit down and talk things through. It was time to lay all the cards on the table. I want to replace the pretense with something real, and since you already have experience, I'm offering you a permanent position. What do you say? Do you want to give it a try? I agreed, and now, 15 years later, I'm glad I did. What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, this story was quite interesting, especially I was surprised that the wife would tell her husband that she wanted a divorce. What was your reaction to this turn of events? Write in the comments. Until new videos.